and will hit the ground running. So in terms of printed music, this is a sea change in music history. Why? Because think about it. If you had to write every little bit, every little single note by hand, think of the limitations that that puts on you in terms of being able to disseminate music. Like you can't make as many copies, so not everybody is going to have access to the manuscripts that you make. But also B, there's a lot more room for variation and error. And we talked about this when we talked about the spread of the Frankish liturgical chants for the Mass. This idea that because we are writing down an order, we have all kinds of variants depending on how the scribes remembered the music. But now in the Renaissance, we start to see, well, we do see the advent of printed music, meaning we're not relying on memory, we're not relying on human error anymore. We have machines to scientifically and precisely reproduce the music that we want to disseminate. And of course, we can disseminate it more widely because now all I have to do is just crank out multiple copies. So the important people that we should know with music printing, first and foremost, is a guy named Ottaviano Petrucci. So if you ever get scores off of IMSLP, the Petrucci say that 5 times fast, Petrucci project, that's this guy. It's named after Petrucci, and we have this giant database of scores named after him because he was the guy who popularized, and I hate to use the word invented because it was the contribution of more than one person, but for the sake of history, let's just say he invented music printing. So Petrucci was based in Venice, and he actually held a monopoly on printing there, meaning literally no other person could print music in that city. So if you wanted a piece of music in or around Venice, it came off of Petrucci's press. So that's how important he is. Also, he published in multiple genres, sacred and secular. So he's not just specializing in one thing, he's pretty much dominating the entire market, no matter what kind of music you're looking for. Now, the landmark publications of Petrucci were his first 3 volumes. And these were a set published from 1501 to 1504. So there are 3 separate books, 3 published between 1501 and 1504, Odecaton A, Odecaton B, and anybody want to take a stab at what that 3rd volume was called? Odecaton C. Congratulations. So this set of 3 volumes is the first polyphonic music printed with movable type. He used a process called multiple impression printing that we're going to talk about in a second. And again, this is a huge advancement over scribes having to copy by hand. Now, these collections, the Odecaton A, B, and C, were kind of a who's who of all contemporary composers. I noticed in the check-ins from last time, a lot of people said that Petrucci's volumes were called Who's Who. And I want to be very clear, they were not called Who's Who. They were called Odecaton A, B, and C. We can compare them to modern Who's Who. Like Venetian or anybody in the Renaissance would have had no concept of what Who's Who means. That's a modern thing and a modern comparison that we can make. So just to be very clear, Petrucci's works, not called Who's Who, but they functioned as a Who's Who in the modern sense of collecting all of the big names in the music world of Petrucci's time. So not only was it valuable for the customers who could view the Odecaton and other volumes published by Petrucci later, the customers could view his works as a one-stop shop for all their music needs, because it's not like, he's spanning a vast gamut of genres and composers. It's also valuable for the composers to get their works published by him, because it's kind of like getting a top 40 album today, when you can get all of the latest hits, and you as a listener get introduced to new composer or new singers or whatever that you maybe hadn't heard of before. But it also functions as marketing for those performers and composers. So does everyone understand the double advantages to audiences and composers, why everybody would be invested in these Odecaton books? Good, good. So these are hugely valuable. Oh, question, Shyla? All good? Okay, I'm gonna assume that was a mic fluke. Good. So not only is this valuable to members of Petrucci's society, it's valuable to us today as historians, because it is documenting all of musical existence. Then he gives us snapshots of each subset of the musical world that was operating in his time. So that's why Petrucci and the Odecaton volumes are so very big, both for people in Renaissance Venice and subsequent centuries. Now, another guy named Pierre Attaignant was a music printer in Paris just about a generation later. So again, we started in Venice, now we're looking at Paris a generation later. And much like Petrucci in Venice, Attaignant held the monopoly, we call it a patent, on music printing in Paris. And he was one of the first to use a technology called single impression printing. And in just a minute, we're going to talk about the differences between multiple and single impression printing. But if you think Pierre Attaignant, you should think two things: Paris and single impression printing. If you think of Petrucci, you should think two things. Well, three things. You should think Venice, the Odecaton volumes, and multiple impression printing. Petrucci, Attaignant, Petrucci, Attaignant. Now, let's talk about the difference in technology here. So both of them rely on what we call movable type. And I'm actually going to take you to a different website here. Why is there a series of like 5 buttons that we need to press to do this each time? Okay. So this is a really valuable website, musicprintinghistory.org, if anyone's interested. But it basically gives us a history of the way music was put on paper, from the very earliest scribes to the modern day, when we use like Sibelius and Finale and Notepad and Noteflight and all that stuff. So what we're looking at here is a thing called movable type. Now I'm going to scroll down to this picture so that you can see. Movable type means that we are putting pieces of music and text together. So here are my notes. Here's my text. We are putting pieces of notes and text together so that we can create a whole score. Why is it called movable? Because we can take out pieces and replace them. We don't have to create a new set of type each time. It's almost like Henry Ford's model of interchangeable parts on a car. Movable type is just interchangeable chunks of type. That's why it's movable. You can interchange them. Does everybody understand what we mean by movable type? Can I get a thumb or a hand? Thumb if you feel good, hand if you have questions. Okay, I see a few thumbs. Are we sure? I'm seeing more and more thumbs. Are we sure nobody has questions, or did we just dip out of the room? Okay, I'm going to assume that some of us dipped out of the room and keep going. So this is movable type, and you can see, pretty sure that's the coolest thing I'll see. It's really, would you guys like me to pop the link in the chat so that you can visit this at some point? Okay, here's the link. And again, this is just the page on movable type. There's a whole website here that is, it goes throughout centuries. So this is just one very specific portion of it. But look at the technology here. And here's the result of it. So here's the little chunks that we put together. Here's the resulting printout and what it looks like. Okay, so let's go back to our slideshow now that you understand what movable type is. And that link is in the chat in case anyone didn't see. Go ahead and copy. So the way it works in terms of single impression versus multiple impression, here's what happened. Petrucci again was using, oh, all good, John? Question? Oh, you doing okay, John? Okay, I'm gonna assume we're okay. So the way single impression works, the one that Petrucci would have used, is that Petrucci laid down staves first. So the first impression, i.e. the first thing we stamp on the paper, is the staves. We just have a set of staves on the paper. That's the first impression. The second impression is we put down the actual notes on the paper. So here's the tricky part. You, as the person operating the printing press, have to be very careful to line up the paper with the press so that the notes all go on the right lines. So impression 1, staves. Impression 2, notes. And you got to be really, really careful to make sure that that finicky press lines up exactly right with the paper so that the staves or the notes go on the correct lines. The third impression would be the text underneath or above. So the words that go with a piece of that would be, oh, John, we okay, man? If you could, John, just so that we don't overlap with the, there we go. Thank you. Okay. I think we're good. Where were we? The third impression, the text. So the last thing that goes on the page is the words. So that would be what we call triple impression printing. If we wanted to add more stuff, we could add more stuff, but it was usually 3 times around. So that's multiple impression printing. Does everybody understand how multiple impression printing works? Did I get a thumb or a hand? Awesome. Okay, I see a few thumbs. And I don't see any hands. So let's go ahead and keep going. Now, single impression printing, the thing that Attaignant used was he would have chunks of staff with notes printed on them. So it would be just a tiny, instead of the big block of all the staves, you would have a tiny little block with just a chunk of stave plus a note. So you as the printer are picking out what little chunks you need to line up together to make the whole line that you want to make. It's like it almost like setting individual letters of regular text. Each quote unquote letter would be a little chunk of stave with a little note on it. Now, the advantage of that is you don't have to worry about lining up multiple impressions anymore because it's just one impression. And that one impression puts music and notes together on the paper. The funny thing about it, and if we look at the PowerPoint here, oh wait, here we go. That's the slide. Nope, go there. Thank you. If we look here at, that's what I want. The different examples of printing. Here's Attaignant's single impression printing. I'm gonna open it. Okay. Can everybody see how these lines are kind of jagged? They don't necessarily connect. Like, look, here's a little break. Here's a little break. If we follow the lines, they look kind of wobbly. That's because these are all individual chunks lined up next to each other. They are not one whole piece of type. So I've got the clarity of having the note right on the line. I've got that accuracy. At the same time, though, my lines kind of waver and kind of jiggle around because they're individual pieces and not one whole piece. Contrast that, whoop, nope, please get smaller. Contrast that with a piece from the Odecaton. And look how clean and smooth that is. That's all one piece. But notice how there are some notes here that like, they're kind of ambiguous. Where's a good example? Okay, right here. Does that dot go with that? Or does that dot go with that? Are they their own little noom together? Which line are they on? Because that's kind of in the line and the space. Same with this dot. So the advantage is that we have that smoothness, but not always accuracy. That's multiple impression printing. That's the Odecaton that Petrucci created. So the advantage with single impression, multiple impression Petrucci technology is that it's smooth but not accurate. The opposite is true with Ataïn's single impression. It's accurate but not smooth. Does everybody understand the differences? Like if I gave you two pictures, would you be able to, whoops, no, go the other way. Would you be able to identify which is which? Can I get a thumb or a hand? Okay, good, good. I'm seeing several thumbs. Excellent. So let's go back here. The other I don't want to say advancement, that implies like one version is better than another, but the other change that music printing brings about in the world is that music becomes intellectual property now. We have a clear sense of who owned what. Now it's not just scribes copying down what they felt like. It is printers printing pieces by specific composers and documenting, fixing, and by fix, I mean like freezing. Now it's on a page, unchangeable, fixing music for the centuries. So because music becomes fixed, we have a sense of ownership now. Here's the definitive version of this motet. Here's the definitive version of this Bergeret or this Barzelletta or whatever, because now it's on paper and unchangeable. It is immutable once a printer fixes a static copy on the page. So yes, intellectual property is now a thing. We can arrange music on the page in several ways. And a few of the most popular I've put examples of here. Probably the most common is to have what we call part books. Now that means today we're used to reading things in score, right? Where like even in your Norton anthologies, when you study your Nortons, you're seeing a full score. All of the voices are lined up together in systems on the same page together at the same time. So we're used to reading things in full score. Part books are like what you see in orchestra or band or choir. When you're not seeing everybody else's part, you are seeing one part, presumably the own part that you are going to perform. So what printers would do is publish not just one book with a full score, they would publish a cantus part book, a superius part book, an altus part book, and so on and so forth. So each book had the same pieces, but a different voice part. Does everyone understand what we mean by part books? Good, okay. Again, it's familiar to us from like the way we operate in our own modern ensembles, where we just have a book telling us our part. And that's what this is here. I just see one part of this piece of music. Here's I think that's a tenor part. I think. So we just see like the tenor part here. Another way that we can lay this out is called table format. And that is, notice how freaky this is. Each different voice part is facing a different direction. Why do you guys think that would be? Why would I want a book with music facing in all directions at once?
Because people stand around a table and like sing it.
Take a guess.
He said that like if they wanted to like have the music in one spot and people like stand around a table,
Yes,
that's what
exactly.
Nathan said.
Precisely. That's why it's table format. So you lay it out and you've got everybody can just clamor around. Oh, I'm singing the tenor part. Let me go on that side of the table. Oh, I'm singing the superius. Let me go on this side of the table. And so you would just have a circle of people standing around, and this allows them to sing or play from the same book all at the same time. We call that table format. And another popular format, the last one that we should be aware of, is the idea of collections. Collections, that would be like Odecaton. Here's what Odecaton would look like, where we've got the individual voices laid out next to each other. So they're not in separate books like the part book format, but they're not in separate directions like the table format either. The collections have all of the voices, and I'm going to resize this so we can see a little better. All of the voices laid out next to each other. So like, here's the superius, here's the tenor, here's the contratenor, and here's the bass, all next to each other. So these pages are next to each other, and we can see all of them at the same time, but they're not, sorry, laid out in score, and they're not in separate books, and they're not in separate directions. Does everybody understand the differences between all three types of printing formats that we have here? Good. Get a few more thumbs to make sure that we all feel good. Or if you have a question, please don't hesitate to put up a hand. Okay, I see several thumbs. So let's go ahead and move on. That's my little spiel on printed music. Let's move on to all of the fun stuff that we have for today. As soon as I go through this 5-button process. Oh, okay, there we go. So there we go. What we are dealing with in the Renaissance is a philosophy of humanism. And it's very much based on the classical model of ancient Greece and Rome. Classical literally means just based on ancient Greece and Rome. So we call this classical humanism. And what this is the realization of human potential in mind and body. It's humanism is learning to look at humans and value humans as supreme in the world. The catchphrase for humanism is man as the measure of the universe. In other words, man is the supreme arbiter of everything around us. We are the center of existence. We as humans are the center of existence. That's why it's humanism. And we'll talk about what this means for us later in the Renaissance in terms of society, because what we start to see is with humanism, there's less need for priests and rituals to have contact with the divine. The divine is supposedly everywhere within humans. So we can see how this is going to upset traditional society later in the Renaissance. It also raises the importance of scripture for laymen to read and individual prayer, because scripture and prayer then become the direct means of communicating with the divine, as opposed to having a priest pray for you or having a priest perform a ritual. So we start to see how humanism is at tension with traditional European society. Again, we call it classical humanism because it is looking back to ancient Greece and Rome. They are rediscovering these classical texts, and we talked about that and when we talked about the Renaissance in general. But there's a growing understanding during the Renaissance of the cultural patrimony and all the knowledge that has been passed down through millennia from one civilization to the next. We are rediscovering that patrimony during the Renaissance. That's why it's the rebirth. So we start to look back at those earlier civilizations as the standard which we should copy in all aspects of art and life. What does this mean for us musically? Well, we start to question Boethius, right? We adopt Boethius because, remember, he is transmitting the ancient Greek beliefs of Pythagoras and Plato to us. So there's a strong Boethian influence, but we start to question the categorization of musica universalis, humana, and instrumentalis. We talked about that last time with Tinctoris and Zarlino. Also, musically, we see an emphasis in the Renaissance on declamation of text. In other words, composers start to value the clarity of enunciation and the power of language, the power of words, in addition to the notes they're being sung to. So despite the growing complexity of pervasive imitation, despite the growing complexity of more and more voices of polyphony, we start to see a valuing of the words that the words that we're singing. Okay, so that's the Renaissance philosophy governing the next couple centuries that we're going to talk about. Does anybody have any questions about the philosophy governing the Renaissance?
So did they like try and adopt the Boethius Musica Mundana Humana Instrumentalis, or did they reject it? I wasn't clear on that.
Okay, good question. The answer is yes and yes. So they liked to adopt some aspects of it. They liked to adopt this idea of the numerical relationships, the ratios, but they are questioning that categorization into three parts. So they like the numbers part of it. They don't like musica universalis humana instrumentalis. To them, it's just instrumentalis. Make sense?
Gotcha.
Fantastic. So apologies for not being clear on that before. Yes, they are saying yes to some parts of Boethius and no to others. Good. The primary exemplar of what's going on, like the person we all look to when we talk about this rebirth in music, is a guy named Josquin des Prez. Now, before we talk about Josquin, we should know that there is a controversy about his biography. Until about the last 50 years or so, scholars accepted every attribution of his unquestioningly. So in other words, if a scribe or if a printer put Josquin next to a piece of music, we as historians just said, oh, must be Josquin, because he was the dude, like the with a capital THE, the dude of the Renaissance. So we didn't question it. Within the last 50 years or so, we have discovered other texts. And these other texts are saying, wait a minute, maybe this piece wasn't really written by Josquin. Maybe Josquin wasn't actually in that place at that time. Maybe we're putting it to his name because he had such a strong influence, but he didn't actually create this. So long story short, we are constantly examining pieces that are attributed to Josquin to see if they were actually his, or if his name just got put on it because he had such a strong influence. However, we're still pretty confident that he was one of the most prolific composers of the era, because he was active for 50 years. And like, if you have a 50-year career, well, then you're Cher. So, you know, Josquin would be like the Cher of Renaissance music, I suppose. So he's prolific just for the length of time, but also B, he wouldn't have had such a strong influence if he weren't prolific. So we can be pretty confident that whatever Josquin did do, it was a big deal. So that's Josquin. Also, side note, notice that I'm not calling him Dupre. Dupre was not his last name. We just know his name was Josquin. Dupre is kind of like Leonardo da Vinci. Da Vinci wasn't Leonardo's last name. It just means he was from Vinci. So does everyone understand Josquin, the guy? Dupre is his not nickname, but Dupre is how we identify him. Good. Okay. I see a thumb. Thank you, Mark. So I'm going to assume that we all know Josquin is Josquin. Good, Jared. Okay. So we all know Josquin is Josquin. Now, what makes him so important? Well, he, according to a theorist named Glorianus, whom we're going to talk about in just a moment as well, according to Glorianus, Josquin defined what we call the ars perfecta. The ars perfecta is the epitome of Renaissance polyphony. That's the definition of ars perfecta, is the perfect art. So in other words, the state of the art Renaissance polyphony. Josquin was the originator of that perfect art. Now, again, according to Glorianus, Josquin was known for evoking a range of emotions. In other words, he's not like focusing on one aspect. He's not cornered into one niche genre. He's not doing just one thing. He's known for being able to evoke a wide range of feelings and responses in his listeners. He also revised works over time. So we can see this development of his style as he's making revisions and changes. And he, unlike a lot of other composers, held music back until he felt it was ready for publication. Remember, musicians are craftsmen at this point in time. So the common musician's goal is just to get as much music out there as quickly as possible. Josquin is not doing that. Josquin is working on the same pieces over and over again until he feels that they're ready for the public. He also, the reputation of Josquin sticks around for a long, long time, because even through the mid 16th century, Martin Luther, whom we're going to talk about next week, led what we call the Josquin revival. Martin Luther, the inventor of Lutheranism, that seems like a pretty straightforward connection, yes? So Martin Luther, the inventor of Lutheranism, felt that Josquin was the exemplary model of what a composer should be, mainly because of the clarity of his text, the complexity of his polyphony, the ars perfecta. He's the perfected art, or his art is the perfected art. So because Josquin was the state-of-the-art Renaissance composer, Martin Luther initiates the Josquin revival. And so thanks to Martin Luther, Josquin comes down to us through the generations, upholding that same championship title, if you will. So that's why Josquin is important. Let's listen to a little bit of his stuff. And the first one that we have is, and this is probably the most famous Josquin piece that we still have with us today, is his Ave Maria Virgo Serena motet. Now, this is a motet because it is a meditation on a sacred subject. Ave Maria tells us that it's a prayer to the Virgin Mary. So that's immediately off the bat, we know this is some kind of Christian religious text. Now, in contrast to other motets, though, notice there's only one text. Remember that when motets developed out of the clausulae of the Notre Dame School of Polyphony back in the 11th and 12th centuries, when those motets developed, they developed by putting multiple texts over a tenor chant text, right? That's how we had things like De Vitris Tribum Quoniam Merito. That's how we had the other motets that we talked about with multiple titles, because we had multiple texts. With this one, we don't have those multiple texts. All of the voices are singing the same words. Now, the text is made up of two different pieces. The first piece is a quatrain, so a 4-line poem. And this quatrain is taken from the sequence for the Feast of the Annunciation. So that's in March. Like it's a very springtime feast, because the Annunciation, meaning, for anyone not familiar with that, the Annunciation would be the time when the angel Gabriel announced to the Virgin Mary that she was going to have the baby Jesus. And so in the Christian tradition, that gets associated with springtime, growth, like, here's this seed of life blooming. So we associate Annunciation with springtime. And that sequence, Josquin took a 4-line part of it, and that 4-line part of the sequence is the beginning of his motet. The other section of text is from a votive antiphon that commemorates the 5 feasts. Somebody remind me what a votive antiphon is.
Say that again.
Somebody remind me what a votive antiphon is.
So I'm just gonna throw a guess out there. So is it just like the prayer that you say before, like on that specific feast day, like the introit or something? Or
Yes and no.
distinct?
So it is it's an antiphon. We talked about what antiphons are, right? Those bits of chant that would go with psalms. Okay, so those are antiphons. Votive antiphons are specific to either a saint or a feast, and they're not associated with a psalm the way regular antiphons are. So yeah, Mark, good. They can be used on specific occasions. More commonly, they are just simply addressing a particular saint. So it doesn't have to be on that saint's feast day. It can be any day you want to pay homage to that saint. But yes, it can be also a feast day. It can be throughout the year. The point is that it's honoring a specific saint. In the case of this antiphon, it's honoring the Virgin Mary. So yeah, please guys, please do know what votive antiphons are, because they're hugely important. Hint, hint, you're going to want to understand how antiphons work for the midterm. So this particular votive antiphon is an antiphon to the Virgin Mary, and it basically commemorates, she had, it's a weird transitional time. She started out with 4 feast days, then she had 6 feast days. We're in a weird transitional time here where we're celebrating 5 feast days of the Virgin Mary. So this antiphon commemorates Mary's feast days. The thing that I need you guys to know is not the number of feast days, but what I need you to know is that the text of Ave Maria is joined 2 sections together. One of them is a sequence, one of them is a votive antiphon. Is everyone with me to that extent? Can I get thumbs or hands? Okay. I see a few thumbs. Let me go back and elaborate. So the first 4 lines of text come from a sequence. Remember, a sequence was one of those parts of the Mass proper that got added throughout the centuries of Frankish standardization of liturgy. So the sequence was one of those genres that came about in the like 10 and 1100s. So it's one of the last parts of the Mass proper to be developed, but it is a part of the Mass proper. So this particular quatrain is taken from a sequence for the Feast of the Annunciation. What I need you to know is that the first 4 lines come from a sequence. That's what I need you to know. The rest of the text comes from a votive antiphon to the Virgin Mary. That's what I need you to know here. So the 2 things that I need you to know are that we have a quatrain from a sequence and the rest of it from a votive antiphon. Now, can I do thumbs or hands now? Does that feel better? Okay. Well, how about let's do this. Can everyone grab your Norton anthologies and look at the text? Okay, now those first 4 lines, the ones beginning Ave Maria, Virgo Serena, those first 4 lines are lines taken from a sequence, part of the Mass proper, that would have been sung on the Feast of the Annunciation. Okay. The next section, actually the rest of it, is basically it's all taken from the same chant. It's all taken from the votive antiphon dedicated to the Virgin Mary. So the Ave Maria, Gratia Plena, Dominus Tecum, Virgo Serena, that quatrain, that's from a sequence. Everything from Ave Cuius Conceptio, Solemni Plena Gaudio, all the way to the end, O Mater Dei, Memento Mei, all the way to the end, that's a votive antiphon. The first 4 lines, Ave Maria to Virgo Serena, quatrain from the sequence. The rest of it, Ave Cuius Conceptio to O Mater Dei, Memento Mei, that is a votive antiphon. Now, can I do thumbs or hands? Okay, I keep seeing like the same few thumbs, so I'm just going to assume other people aren't in the room anymore. Let's go ahead and go on. Okay. The cantus firmus, in other words, those source chants, is treated with pervasive imitation. We talked about pervasive imitation last week. Somebody remind me what pervasive imitation is.
Is it when like the different voice parts like imitate the first voice that comes in? So like after the first voice comes in, the next voices come in, but like it's the same thing, just like later.
Exactly. So that first voice will sing a motif, and then that motif gets passed around through all the other voices kind of ad nauseum. It just keeps echoing and echoing. Good. That's pervasive imitation. Sometimes we even see paired imitation. Can somebody remind me what paired imitation is? Straightforward. Pair means 2 of something, right? So paired imitation would be,
So like the imitation like splits into 2 voices, so 2 voices would sing at the same time, and then the other 2 voices would sing the same thing but later.
Are you
You can
hinting
say
that
no,
this
that's
is kind
fine.
of like around?
I was trying not to say no. I didn't want to tell you just no.
Are you hinting that this is kind of like a round or like a can?
No, because a round or canon then would be all of the voices doing the same melody, right? What paired imitation is, guys, these are words that we all should know. So please make sure you understand what paired imitation is. Please, please, please. Hugely important. Paired imitation is when we have pairs of voices imitating each other. So in other words, like the top 2 voices are going to trade motifs. They're going to sing, like the superius is going to sing one thing and the altus is going to sing another. So my top 2 voices are going to imitate each other. Then another set of 2 voices will sing something different and imitate each other. So I have 2 different melodies going on, and they're being traded among 2 different pairs of voices. Does that make sense to everyone? Awesome. Okay. See a few thumbs. Oh, guys, please drink your coffee. Please drink your coffee in the mornings. Okay, so that's the texture that Josquin is using here. Notice his cadences are still very traditional. So despite the English countenance of triadic harmony, we still end on open fifths and octaves. So it's a very traditional sounding, strong ending to the phrases. Also, this idea of mimesis. We talked about mimesis last time. Someone remind me what mimesis is. It's a fancy word for a very straightforward concept.
You like compose the music to sound like what it's representing.
100, couldn't state it better myself. Well done, Mark. So my question that I want you to meditate on as we are listening to this is, how can we hear mimesis? How can we hear text painting? How can we hear that representation of the text in the music? So you've got the text in front of you, you've got the score in front of you. I'm going to play the music and I want you to think about how we can hear that text painting. So here we go. Here's our Ave Maria. Okay, so I just want to stop here and point out, we just finished the quatrain of the sequence. Now we are moving into the votive antiphon part. Okay, so let's take a pause there. What kinds of representation do we hear in that?
I'm sorry, can you say that one more time?
Sure. What kinds of representation do we hear in that music? How is Josquin representing the text to us?
So my guess would be like with the pervasive imitation, it's supposed like especially in the quatrain, like the first three lines of the quatrain is what the angel is saying to Mary when he first like appears there. So like I would imagine that any like a representation of a literal angel singing would be like harmonious or something like that. So with a pervasive imitation, it would kind of be like hypnotic like that.
And notice it starts high and comes down, right? It starts in that very high superius voice. And then the lower voices gradually chime in and it gets lower and lower. So it's as if the angel is descending to speak on the human plane. It's like we're starting up in the celestial sphere of heaven, and then we come down to speak to humans. Excellent. Good, good. What other kinds of imitation do we hear in that chunk? Okay, what
I
if,
kind of sorry.
no,
I kind of noticed that like in the bass line, it like starts to ascend towards the top of its range. So, and that's when, well, I mean, I guess not quite. But I guess later it talks about the assumption, and so like if it you have like the voices like starting like and also in the tenor like it raises up towards the top of the range. So it's supposed like elevating Mary or something.
Absolutely. We mentioned last time that in the Christian tradition, the Christians would look at Mary as this intermediate. We call her an intercessor between God and humanity. So as the angel is coming down to speak to human, we're seeing humanity rise up to meet that angel. And in, that's kind of like Mary's place, that she's in the middle, mediating between God and man. Exactly. And then I let Maya's comment that the bass line is this very triumphant. We have that like in the motif, that dun dun bum 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 bum. We have that nice wide leap. So it goes up gradually, and then we just come down on that feels like a very strong cadence, a very strong resting point. Yeah. So that strength there is kind of like, it's like a fanfare. We're basically giving a fanfare here. Absolutely. Any other observations that we should make? Okay, so that's Ave Maria Virgo Serena. Let's also talk about another piece by Josquin that illustrates the Ars Perfecta for it. So wait a minute. Why did this? Okay, sorry, I thought I was looking at the wrong slide. Nope, this is my Benedicta slide. Okay, so this again is another motet with a single text. This time also comes from a sequence for the Annunciation. So we're taking the same text, or a different part of the same source text. We're not setting the exact same lines, but we're going to the same source text. Now, remember that sequences were structured in what we call double versicles. What that means is it's those rhyming couplets. So a double versicle is a couplet, literally. And the sequence would be just a series of these rhyming couplets that well, that's it. They're rhyming couplets. They're series of rhyming couplets. That's what a double versicle is. So in this particular motet, we're setting 3 of the double versicles. So in other words, 3 couplets. Again, here, the chant starts in the highest voice. Now, that's odd for a motet, right? Where are we used to seeing the chant in a motet?
In the tenor part.
Precisely. That's why it's the tenor. It's held. It's that slow chant. Josquin doesn't do that to us here. Josquin puts the chant in the upper voice. So the chant starts high. The way he divides the text in this motet is that we've got a prima pars, a secunda pars, and a terza pars. That means first part, second part, third part. I think we all can understand what a first, second, and third part is. So the prima pars, the first part, contains 2 of the 3 double versicles. So 2/3 of my text goes into the first part of the motet. Does everyone understand that? First part contains 2 couplets. First part, 2 couplets. Good. Okay. So my prima pars is 2 double versicles. And here Josquin employs 6 voices. So that's, again, pretty thick, pretty dense. Remember that these things are getting increasingly complex in polyphony. So we've got 6 voices. The cantus firmus is in canon. So there, Maya, like we talked about, having a melody and then the other voice repeats it. So the cantus firmus is in canon between superius and tenor. That pair gets contrasted with paired imitation in other voices. So the cantus and superius are one pair, and we see Josquin pitting that pair against other pairs of voices. Everyone with me so far? Thumbs or hands? Good. Okay. See a couple thumbs. Good. Few thumbs. Perfect. Okay. So that's my prima parse. My seconda parse is the first line of the third versicle. So in other words, if my third couplet, I take the first line of that couplet, and that's my seconda parse. So in contrast to the prima parse, which is 2 full couplets, the seconda parse is just 1 line of 1 couplet. So smaller chunk of text here. Josquin only uses 2 voices for this part. 2. We've got a dramatic reduction in texture here. We are much sparser, much thinner in the seconda parse. We drop down from 6 voices to 2. And the texture changes as well. We have, instead of that paired imitation, now we've got a paraphrase of the source chant as points of imitation. Somebody remind me what a paraphrase is.
Just the word paraphrase?
Well, musically. So when I say a paraphrase in music, what do we mean?
Is this like where composers take other like polyphonic works from other composers and make it their own?
Really close. So that would be parody when I'm taking a polyphonic source. So really close. The only difference is that with paraphrase, I'm not taking polyphony. I'm just taking one source chant and embellishing it to make it my own.
So like one melody line and they're like adding, okay, ornamentations.
100%. Composers are taking one melody line and adding their own twist to it. Fantastic. Thank you. Great, Maya. Oh, question, Marissa?
No, sorry, I accidentally unmuted.
Oh, okay. You're good. Been there, done that. Okay, so that is a paraphrase. When we take that source melody, and well, when I say we, I mean Josquin. So Josquin takes that source melody and he adds his own embellishments to it. So in the secunda parse, that's what he's doing, and he's turning the source melody into points of imitation. In other words, those little motifs, those little chunks of motifs that keep getting passed around. The terza parse, the third part, is the second line of the third couplet. So we're looking at the last double versicle and taking the last line. We're back to 6 voices in the terza parse. So we went from 6 voices to 2 voices. Now we're back to 6. The texture is denser again, thicker. We've got more voices of polyphony. And again, Josquin paraphrases as points of imitation. So he's using the same compositional technique in the secunda and terza parse, but now he's just upped the ante by adding more voices. So thinner, denser, but same compositional technique. Everybody with me on that? Can I get thumbs or hands if we feel good or questionable? Awesome, wonderful. You guys are rock stars. The thing that I want you to pay attention to are the moments of homophony. Homophony, remember, is when we have all the voices moving at the same time, singing the same syllables at the same time. So suddenly my text becomes very clear, as opposed to that complexity of the intertwining imitation. Sometimes Josquin gives us these moments of homophony. Sometimes he makes a certain chunk of the text stand out. And we said before in our introduction to the Renaissance that when we have moments of homophony, that's when we really want to pay attention, because that's something the composer is trying to highlight, right? So let's talk about, or let's listen to this, and then I want to talk about these moments of homophony. When do they crop up? What text do you notice is associated with them? So here's my Benedicta Ace, and we'll listen to homophony. Okay, so we have a little bit of a nice cadence there. What do we notice about homophony and how it's working in that motet?
There wasn't really any sections where they were all singing the same words at the same time. Like it was pretty dense the entire time for the most part.
Pretty dense for the most part, but we had these little moments emerge, right? Where
Probably for clarity, like probably very intentional.
absolutely. And notice they don't last long, right? We're not talking like extended sections. We're not talking about whole phrases, but just these little moments of clarity when Josquin is emphasizing one word in particular. Does that make sense? Like we're not looking at whole big sections. We're just looking at like little chunks of a word or two. Okay, so how is Josquin using this homophony? What did you notice about the way we approach it, the way we leave it, when it occurs?
I was just gonna say that it's people now. It sounds like musicians are starting to approach texture of music differently because before you might have an entire section of like quote unquote clarity and then an entire section of like super complex harmony and then like another whole section of like one thing and another whole section of another thing. But now it's like they're just kind of blending in and out of stuff. Like composers are like easing in and out of different textures like seamlessly. Like it's becoming more like um just like diverse in each section, you know what I'm saying? Like
Mhm.
which is like that's kind of like how music is today. Like it's very diverse. Like each like you blend in and out of different textures like within a couple phrases, you know what I mean? Whereas like in the last couple chapters we've been listening to like entire movements that sound pretty much the same and then another different movement that sounds pretty much the same the whole time and then you know.
Absolutely. There was much starker contrast and much more clearly defined sections. And what Josquin is doing here is more supple. It's not like we have one texture throughout. It's this constantly changing and shining and shimmering splendid magic carpet ride. No. This yeah, it's just constantly changing. He doesn't rest anywhere. And Maya uses the word mushy. Exactly. Yeah. Especially because we're dealing with pervasive imitation, right? So it's not like we have clear cadences and one very huge feature of Renaissance music in general, this is not a Josquin thing, this is a Renaissance thing, is what we call cadential elision. And everything should properly link back to Disney. It is just and right. But we have this thing called cadential elision, which means that we never rest on, we never have like one solid ending point where everybody ends. But because we have this pervasive imitation, what we have instead is each voice doing its own thing at different times. So sometimes I have a really strong cadence in the Superius line, but in other times I have a really strong cadence in the tenor line. Other times I have a really strong cadence in the bassus, and they don't necessarily line up. When one voice's phrase ends, another voice is just bursting right on through to continue their phrase. That's cadential elision. Does everybody understand what cadential elision is? A few more thumbs so we feel a little more confident. Good, okay, good. So that's cadential elision, and that cadential elision gives us the mushiness that Maya is referring to. That idea that we've got all the voices going at their own pace and cadencing in their own time. Any other thoughts on the Benedictes? Okay, let's keep going. So I promised you we were going to talk about Glarian, or Glarianus if you want to use the Latin. It's the same person, Glarian and Glarianus, same guy. And here we are. So Henry, let's just call him Hank for the sake of not sounding pretentious. So Hank Glarian was a Swiss music theorist and philosopher. His large work was the Dodecacordon from 1547. He was based in Cologne, then Basel, then Freiburg. So, you know, the like Swiss Germanic territories. And he traveled throughout his career. So even though he's like kind of based in those cities, he's getting his ideas out there to a vast swath of people around a wide geographical area. And what Glarian does that's really important to us is he expands modal possibilities into 12 modes. So remember, we started out with the original 8 church modes: Dorian and Hypodorian, Phrygian and Hypophrygian, Lydian and Hypolydian, Mixolydian and Hypomixolydian. Those were my 8 original church modes. Remember, we can define those church modes based on the final and the range of a chant. And those 8 church modes had been around since the early Middle Ages, when the Frankish Empire was starting to standardize chant. Those 8 original church modes have served us well for several centuries, but Glarianus adds more, and things that sound familiar to us today. He adds 4 new modes that have finals on C and A. That sounds familiar to us today because that sounds like our major and minor scale, right? Final C major and A minor, right? So his C modes, the ones with a final of C, are called Ionian and Hypoionian. The A modes are Aeolian and Hypoaeolian. So his authentic mode, the one where the range stretches from final to final, would be Ionian with a C final and Aeolian with an A final. The plagal modes, the ones that the range stretches from 5th to 5th, would be Hypoionian if the final is C, and Hypoaeolian if the final is A. Does everyone understand what Ionian, Hypoionian, Aeolian, and Hypoaeolian are? This is big. Can I get thumbs or hands? Okay, I'm seeing some, good, I'm seeing more and more thumbs. Are we sure? And I see a celebratory little popper there. Good. Okay, I see no hands, so I'm assuming that we're all good. Please know, hint, hint, for your midterm and your final, you're probably going to want to know all 12 modes and how to identify them. So if you have questions on that, ask them now. Note the reliance here on ancient Greek names to give credence to the system. Remember, in the Renaissance, the rebirth, we are rediscovering that classical world model. So of course, we'd name them after ancient Greek places. And these new modes, the 4 new modes that Glarian introduces, were not 100% accepted immediately, but they were highly influential, and over the next several years, they became standard. Another interesting thing and very logical thing that Glarian does is he points out that in polyphonic textures, voices are going to be in different ranges. That means if the range of a melody is different, that means its mode is different, right? So if I have my tenor singing from final to final, my tenor is singing in an authentic mode. But if my tenor is singing in authentic mode, that probably means that my superius is singing from fifth to fifth. And so they're singing in a plagal mode. So in other words, each polyphonic piece is participating in both plagal and authentic modes at the same time. And each voice of that polyphonic piece should be analyzed individually to see what mode it's in. Different voice types had different ranges, even though they shared the final. And because mode is based on range as well as final, that means I have to look at each voice individually to see if it's plagal or authentic. Does everybody understand how different voices will be in different modes? Okay, they all have the same final, but they're working in different ranges. So that means the mode is different. Also, like I hinted at before, Glarian did a lot to cement Josquin's reputation in his treatises by using Josquin as an example and praising him constantly. So remember, Glarian is the one saying that Josquin is the model of that ars perfecta. Glarian is the one saying that Josquin is the standard, setting the model for us all in the Renaissance. So it is 10:45. We will pick up with another contrasting theorist on, let's see, today's Wednesday. Yeah, so on Monday, we'll pick up with Zarlino. Does anybody have any questions about any of the theory or pieces that we've talked about so far? Now's the time. Okay, thank you all. Zilch. Excellent. Well, in that case, Jared, I take it everybody had a profitable hour and 15 minutes. So thank you all. You guys are free. I appreciate it. Keep reading, keep studying, keep talking.
I had a quick question
Yes, ma'am.
about the Insight project. That is, sorry, my brain, coffee hasn't kicked in yet. That's due October 4th. And you said it's on anything that we cover before the midterm, correct?
Right. I would like it to stick in the first half. That way, when you do your final paper, then you can do something later in the timeline.
Okay. Did you record do you remember if you recorded when you went over that stuff?
Yeah, it should be on YouTube.
What day that was?
Oh gosh.
I think it was towards the beginning of September. So I would check the first couple weeks of September.
Okay.
Thank you. Yeah, because I remember we said you have like a month and a few days.
Yeah.
So if it's due October 4th, yeah, Mark is right. It should be like
Beginning of September. Okay. Thank you so much. I appreciate it.
excellent. No problem.
And I just have a real quick question for the encyclopedic entry, it's like 300, 400 words. Can we use the Oxford history of music, like the physical book for that?
Yeah, absolutely. So you mean like your textbook or the multi-volume set?
The textbook, the
Okay,
college
yeah.
book. So would we have to cite that as well if it's just common,
If
if it
Taruskin,
includes like an insight, then sure, of course. But like if it's just like factual information from the textbook.
no, you're already on it. If it's somebody's interpretation, like if Taruskin is citing another author, then yes. But if it's just like a fact, like so and so was born in such and such a time and place,
Gotcha.
then yeah.
Awesome. That's all I had. All right. Thank you.
Thank you, Addison. You too.